Hello and welcome back to Case Continued. This is part 2 of episode 3 of our exploration into the Chris Watts case, taking a dive into his letters to author Cheryln Cadle. If you haven't seen my first couple of videos, you might want to go and check them out first, especially if you're brand new to the case. To those of you returning and to those who have subscribed, thank you so much. I honestly appreciate you more than you know, and I am honoured that you've chosen to stick with me. In this series, we're working to break down the story piece by piece, not just to understand what happened, but to carefully examine the facts, the evidence, and the many theories and narratives that have grown around this case online. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of misinformation, speculation, and even lies being passed off as truth, and it's time to separate what's real from what isn't. This is not a series about sensationalism or shock value. It's about truth-seeking, however uncomfortable or complicated that may be. Now, for my important disclaimer, as always, I don't tolerate victim blaming, bullying, or personal attacks in this space. Debate is welcome, but please debate the facts, not feelings. Ask difficult questions, but don't mistake theories for fact. This video and this series as a whole is intended for mature audiences, as some of the content may be distressing, especially that involving children. Please take care of yourselves while watching. Today, we're continuing to explore the controversial letters that Chris wrote to Cheryln Cadle. We'll be asking, does this new version of events finally match the physical evidence? Why would Chris continue to lie? And how have these letters fueled speculation, theories, and sometimes lies? This case isn't just about what happened. It's about why so many people still question what we've been told and what that means for the victims, their families, and the true crime genre as a whole. So let's begin, carefully, respectfully, and as honestly as we can. I'm Fiona, and this is Case Continued. On Christmas Day, Chris again wrote letters to Shanann, Bella, Celeste and Nichol. As I sit in this lonely cell, I look out my window and I see snowflakes lightly fall into the ground. Immediately, I see how excited you, Bella and Cece get when the soft powder is on the ground. I imagine seeing both of you girls rush to get your cold gear on so I could pull you around in your sleds. I remember pulling you both around in the front yard, backyard, and on the sidewalks. It was a blast. I remember us all being in elf outfits last year. Everyone was so excited. Your mommy and me loved every second of it. From the frozen jukebox to the frozen Jeep, the fun never ended. The hole I have in my heart knowing I can't be with you for today is unrepairable. You don't know how much I want to hold all four of you in my arms right now. Spiritually, I know God is with me, Jesus is with me, and all four of you are with me here in this cell. And as I look out this window, I see soft snow falling again. I'm reminded of all the blessings God blesses me with. Merry Christmas, Shanann. Merry Christmas, Bella. Merry Christmas, Cece. I love you, Shanann. I love you, Bella. I love you, Cece. I love you, Nico. Always and forever. Chris then wrote a letter to Bella for her birthday. Happy birthday. I miss you so much. I remember last year at the aquarium for your birthday, you had a blast. Even though you're not physically here, I can feel your amazing spirit around me. When I read you a story or sing you a song in my cell, I know you can hear me. I feel it in my heart. Daddy loves you, always and forever. Celeste. I miss you so, so much, my little rocket ship. I remember every picture of you. You have the biggest smile. It goes from ear to ear and lights up the entire room. I miss picking you up from school, and you sprint towards me once you see me. I still read your lion book to you every night. I know you hear it, and it makes you smile. Daddy loves you, always and forever. Nico, I wish I could have met you, little man. You were going to be a great little ball player, but I know you are being an awesome little brother to those two big sisters you have. Daddy loves you, little man, always and forever. Shanann, every time I close my eyes, I see us on our wedding day. Those big eyelashes, your red lips. You looked flawless. The love was undeniable. Oh, how I wish we could have that moment in time back. Just hit the rewind 5 months ago, but unfortunately, life will not let us. You're an amazing mother and an amazing wife, and I know you hear me when I pray. The signs are everywhere. As long as I live, there will not be a day or night that goes by without me praying to you and the kiddos. I love you with all my heart, always and forever. He then quotes Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 to 26. May the Lord bless you and take good care of you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look on you with favour and give you peace. Chris. In another letter to Cheryln, Chris writes, You wanted me to give you some detail into the life of me, Shanann, and the girls. So here we go. It seemed like the perfect life. I had a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful daughters, a good job, a home. Everything felt like it fit. My life and Shanann's life revolved around Bella and Celeste. We would do anything to make sure they were healthy and happy. We worked as a team, the best we could, even when it was evident the girls only wanted me or only wanted her. I loved picking them up from school. When I walked into Celeste's classroom, our eyes would meet. A huge smile would shine from her face and she would sprint over to me, almost tackling me in the process. Bella would usually be on the playground, so I would usually have to go into the playset to coral her. Once in the car, Bella would find their car ride snacks and disperse one to Celeste, and then I would buckle them up. The car ride home would consist of a lot of singing to Moana, Frozen, or Trolls soundtracks. I loved hearing them sing, and they loved telling me to stop singing. I guess I didn't sing that good. Once home, they would run to Shanann and then eat their dinner. Now, shower time. They usually got me so wet from the bathtub that the shower was a welcome change. They loved washing their hair like big girls. Afterward, Shanann would come up and help lotion them and get their pyjamas on. Then it was off for a snack, a cartoon, brush their teeth, inhalers and meds, and time for bed. Usually, Bella wanted Shanann and Celeste wanted me. Celeste picked about every book in her room some nights and had so many questions. I loved it. She was such a little character. Bella would be waiting for me to sing her a little song, You Are My Sunshine, and get one extra kiss from me. Once in bed, Shanann worked on her phone the rest of the night while we watched our shows on TV. There wasn't a whole lot of conversation going on, and that's my fault too, for not speaking up. The weekend usually consisted of getting the girls outside as much as we could as they were very active. I would take them to the backyard to play on their playset, play some t-ball, or pull them around the neighbourhood in their wagon. At night, on the weekend, we would usually take them to the splash pad because they absolutely loved water. When we would go to the pool, it would be a chore to get them to go home. The smiles on their faces were worth every second though. As I write this, I can see I didn't put much effort in my marriage other than being the best dad I could be and performing my husbandly duties, cleaning, etc. I did as much as I could to keep Shanann from being distracted from her work, that I forgot to focus on her. We did everything as a family. Pumpkin patch at Halloween, plus all of us wearing costumes. I even wore the costume to the girls' Halloween party at their school. Christmas was always fun because I dressed up like Santa and the girls would absolutely love it. Their birthday parties would be a little over the top, but we would do anything for Bella and Celeste. Shanann and I did go out from time to time, usually for birthdays and anniversaries. My favourite memories of her are the early ones, like the beach photos we took while on the trip where I proposed to her in 2011. Her smile was captivating and we were having a blast. Another would be, obviously, the wedding. I'll never forget her walking down the aisle, looking flawless, and seeing her look into my eyes when she walked up to me and saying, breathe. She literally took my breath away. That love never died, yet the focus of that love went towards the kids. I can say with certainty that I always loved Shanann and always will, but there was always that lingering fear that I would do something wrong. The verse 1 John 4:18 comes to mind. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Because how can you fear what you love? Or how can you love what you fear? The two feelings are at enmity with one another, polar opposites if you will. I always seemed to walk on eggshells around Shanann. There was uneasiness and careful, fearful planning with every step I took. That is not what love should feel like, but I never communicated that to her. When I was with Bella and Celeste, being a dad, there was no fear, just overwhelming love. It would have been just how my personality is structured, to be nervous or submissive around Shanann, but that's still not how love should be. Finishing off the rest of the verse, because fear has torment. He that fears is not made perfect in love. Resonates with me because fear is nothing but torment for the soul. That's what the fear eventually did to me. It broke me down spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. Was I aware of it? I don't think so. It's like the frog that was put in a pot full of water, and slowly the water turned to a boil, and the frog boiled to death. I didn't see what was happening until it was too late, and that mistake cost me the chance to grow old with my family for the rest of my physical life. Love is a resounding warmth that envelops your entire being. We should all strive for that, because fear should never conquer love. Love is from God. When we are made in His image, it was in the image of love, and that quality is what will overcome the world. So between lots of talking about frogs being boiled to death, etc., we do kind of get the gist here that Chris really is saying that he didn't feel safe around Shanann. He was always walking on eggshells, he felt uncomfortable, he was worried about what her reaction was going to be whenever he did anything. Is that true? Did he feel like that? That's something to look into in a little bit more detail later. For the most part, this letter comes off as really quite self-serving. And even the way that Chris writes, it's not the way that we know Chris to speak. There's definitely some poetic license going on in these letters. And that's something that we kind of have to take a bit of a deeper look into and see what exactly is going on there, because this Chris sounds like a completely different Chris to the one that we all knew through Shanann's videos. In another letter, Chris writes, "You asked if there's anything I haven't talked about in regards to Nikki. Honestly, I'm not sure what I've said and what I haven't, but this is what I know. She had a small group of friends that she didn't tell me about. They were dark and did some dark things. She didn't tell me a lot about them until the end. She had been involved in an abusive relationship for a few years before, and after that, she removed most of her social media. Not sure if she was hiding from someone. She took medications, never told me what for though. She came over to my house 2 times, July the 4th and July the 14th. I didn't have to work July the 4th, so I stayed at Nikki's house on July the 3rd. That morning, I missed tons of phone calls from Shanann. I went outside to call her, and when I called her back, she was obviously furious. I went back inside and told Nikki I was going home. She was in the shower, and I told her I was going home, and I had decided to stay home the rest of the day, which made Nikki upset. I think this was the first time she realised in her head that she wasn't number one in my life. Later, though, Nikki came over anyway, and we went over a protein eating plan for me. She didn't look around the house so much on that visit. On July the 14th, we were heading back from the Shelby Museum and stopped by my house before we went to get something to eat. While in the house, she was playing with Dita and he led her upstairs, and she saw a lot of pictures of Bella, Celeste and Shanann. I was downstairs at the time. She came back downstairs with this frozen, dazed and confused look on her face, probably now realising for the first time in her head the family life I lived and the family that would be broken to pieces. I walked over and took her to the couch, and we laid on the couch, and she said, "You have all this, more than most people, and we are doing this? Why are we doing this? Are you willing to give all of this up? Is your relationship with your wife that bad?" I told her Shanann and I were drifting apart, and we didn't talk anymore. I'm not sure if I believed that fully, but I can see the deficiencies in our relationship today. Then I also said Shanann and I were actively trying to have a baby before her and I met. Nikki immediately freaked out. She yelled and said our relationship, mine and Shanann's, couldn't have been that bad if Shanann and I were trying to conceive. She was so angry and stormed out to her truck. She sat there for about 30 minutes texting me while I was inside my house. I somehow calmed her down. Nikki repeatedly reminded me I was the only guy that she had ever met that tried to fix problems, smooth out issues and talk about things. Ironically, I never did that with Shanann. Maybe I thought she wouldn't listen. Thinking about that, it made me somewhat sick to my stomach. After all of that, Nikki still invited me over to her house like nothing had happened between us. She said, I got mad because I thought I could give you a son, and when you told me you and your wife were trying, that made me upset. She said that would be a first for you that we could have together. After all of that, we went to the drag races in Bandamere on July the 21st. Then we went camping in the mountains on July the 28th and the 29th. When I was at the airport leaving for North Carolina, she sent me a text. Use this time to fix the issues with your wife and enjoy time with your family. The first night I was there, we were at Shanann's parents' house. I texted Nikki and told her I would not be able to call her, only text with her. Nikki responded, Why not? Are you with her? I thought she wanted me to spend time with my family. It all of a sudden became about her. I realise now that if I had allowed that to be a turning point for me, it could have changed everything. I couldn't see that then, and being able to see that clearly now makes me hurt inside. I was not able to make that choice then. I really wasn't. Whatever had a hold of my mind did not allow me to go to making those kinds of rational decisions. Obviously, Nikki was insisting that I make more time with her, no matter what. The first night I was there was the first night I gave Shanann the oxycodone. I thought it would cause her to have a miscarriage. I looked up on the internet and read about it, and 80 milligrams of oxycodone should have caused her to lose the baby. The next 8 days, I ignored Shanann every night. I did this so I could disappear and talk to Nikki for hours. It was obvious during these conversations she didn't want me to spend time with my family or try to make things better with Shanann, because she had nothing good at all to say about my family life. This twisted my head. I knew I should be giving them attention, but was unable to. I felt like a programmed robot. Things started to not make sense to me. When I returned to Colorado, I saw Nikki after work. I went to her place in my work truck. Any hope of repairing my marriage pretty much was over when Nikki gave me a key to her place. I saw this as a pretty big step because what woman gives another man a key to her house without wanting to take a big step in the relationship? I had told her that Shanann and I were going to get a separation and that the marriage was going to end, but that she was still trying to actively fix our marriage. I think this was the day I realised I had to do something because I couldn't have my family and her at the same time. The last time I saw Nikki was August the 11th when we went out to eat. That's when Shanann was in Arizona and I had gotten a babysitter that night, which is something I never did before while Shanann was away. I told her I was going to a game with some guys because I'd won the lottery at work. Nikki and I talked about our future plans and she told me about apartments she had found for me. She said she was looking at apartments that were big enough for me and the kids. She said after I had my own apartment we could move at a slower pace and treat our relationship as a normal relationship. This told me her main objective was to get me away from my family, specifically Shanann. She said she felt we'd been taking things really fast, since we were together pretty much every night possible in June and July. She had started telling her friends about me, and I could tell she was making plans for our future together. I don't know why, because I had a beautiful wife and beautiful kids at home. There was nothing she could offer me that I wasn't able to get from home, except I could be myself around her. That is not a reason to get rid of my family. Shanann did not do anything for me to get rid of her. I don't know if all of this is common knowledge or not, but that's regarding Nikki, from me. Everything else is probably in the discovery. I hope this sheds some light on that relationship. I pray she has peace now and she can find peace in the Lord. Everyone involved in the tragedy has had their lives turned upside down, and I pray they will seek the Lord with all their heart to get back on the right path. Okay, enough of the Nikki relationship. So there's a lot more going on here as well. And some of this we are going to roll over into a video that we're going to do specifically on Nichol Kessinger and the theories surrounding her potential involvement in this case. There's just so much going on in these letters. Let's start unpacking the content of these letters piece by piece. One particularly disturbing claim that Chris has made since his initial confession is that he allegedly gave Shanann oxycodone when he arrived in North Carolina. He tells Cheryln Cadle in his letters that he had hoped that the drug would cause a miscarriage. Chris had never disclosed this information before. The veracity of his statement in this letter to Cheryln regarding overdosing Shanann really does remain uncertain. Data analysts recovered a deleted Google search from Chris's personal phone for 80 milligrams of oxycodone will... It's only a partial sentence, right? Will what? We'll never know. And the timestamp on that search couldn't be determined. You can find that information, discovery pages 1768 to 1769, for those that are interested. The information is definitely intriguing, but it is inconclusive. Shanann became ill the evening that Chris arrived in North Carolina, prior to his visit to his parents. Frank Ruzek Jr., or Frankie, as we'll call him throughout these videos, informed investigators that Shanann wasn't ill until after Chris's arrival, and he noted that Chris appeared a little bit distant. He'd also mentioned that Shanann had slept on the sofa that evening, which he'd found to be unusual, and Chris didn't check on her, a behaviour which Frankie thought was uncharacteristic for Chris. Frankie himself had checked on Shanann a few times during the night as he was concerned about her vomiting, and Sandy Ruzek also observed that Chris was unsupportive during Shanann's illness, which she too found peculiar, although it appears that nobody verbally questioned it at the time. Shanann's illness in North Carolina is further discussed on pages 74 and 685, I believe, of the Discovery. So go over there and have a little look if you want to, and make of it what you will. Chris apparently put the oxy in Shanann's Thrive shake, so she wasn't aware that she was consuming it. I believe it can be quite bitter tasting when it's crushed and dissolved, but as I've never had it, I can't confirm that fact. I assume it would also have to be put in a thickish drink like a shake, because unless it was an effervescent type tablet, it wouldn't dissolve once crushed into a powder. So a shake would have to be fairly thick to stop the powder congealing and sinking to the bottom. Again, I'm not sure if this is the case with oxycodone specifically, as I've never taken it, but I have tried to crush tramadol to take in a drink, and it would have been utterly impossible to hide the fact that there was a crushed up tablet in it. Shanann had messaged a friend the next morning after getting sick, stating, "Last night Chris rubbed my back for the first time in a month. When he was done, I sat up and was lightheaded. My body felt numb, tingly, itching all over, and just weird." Although Shanann suffered from migraines, her text messages indicate that some of these symptoms that she was experiencing were atypical for her migraine attacks. It's known that Shanann took Imitrex for her migraines, though it's unclear what other medication she was currently taking or had previously taken. Chris had stated to Officer Coonrod when he returned from the survey site on the afternoon of the 13th of August that Shanann had taken more Imitrex in the past month than ever before. Shanann had claimed on some social media posts that her migraines would often get worse in humidity, and this could potentially have been the case in North Carolina. I've suffered with severe migraines my whole life and was previously on Imitrex, or sumatriptan as it's known here in the UK. It's worth noting that if Shanann had taken Imitrex over a number of days, this could have contributed to her feeling unwell, as well as causing rebound headaches. Taking Imitrex too frequently can cause nausea and vomiting, itchy skin and tingling, dizziness and feeling faint and fatigued. The symptoms typically don't last a long time, provided obviously no more Imitrex is taken for a while. All the symptoms that Shanann experienced are also symptoms of a migraine itself. And although her text message to a friend appears to give the impression she thinks there's something other than a migraine attack, it may well have been. My migraines can sometimes surprise me, especially in different climates or in times of stress, and cause symptoms that I don't usually get. But Chris stated he had given Shanann 80 milligrams of oxycodone in a bid to cause a miscarriage, and Shanann's illness that evening does appear to line up with his claim. 80 milligrams of oxycodone in someone who is not opiate tolerant, though, can cause severe respiratory depression, which can lead to death. Would Chris really have risked this while they were staying with the Ruseks, with the 2 young daughters? He said he wanted to cause a miscarriage, not overdose Shanann. But, of course, per the discovery file, we don't know what his full Google search term was. 80 milligrams of oxycodone will... what? After his prison confession, Chris told Cheryln that he had given Shanann oxy twice, once in North Carolina and the morning that she died. That's why she was unable to fight back. He then changed his story and said he gave her the oxy only in North Carolina. So which is it? Why would he lie about giving it to her twice if he didn't? Because it just makes him look worse, right? Why would he lie about giving her it at all if he didn't? Because again, it just makes him look worse. And where did the oxy come from? One theory that people are really big on is that Nichol Kessinger supplied the oxy to Chris and that they had discussed causing a miscarriage in Shanann. The method to this madness was supposedly that it would be easier for Chris to leave Shanann if she wasn't carrying his baby. There were rumours, started online, of course, that Nichol Kessinger had a history of substance abuse issues. However, these rumours have never been substantiated. They just haven't. We'll be discussing claims made about Nichol in much greater detail in the next episode, so I don't want to get too much into it here, but this theory that Nichol supplied the oxy is definitely a popular one. It does, however, seem fairly strange that while Chris has taken every opportunity to blame everyone and everything for his actions, he has never implicated Nichol in the oxy theory. Substance use and partying are probably not uncommon in the oil and gas industry, as with many other industries, so it's plausible that Nichol didn't even need to have a history of substance abuse. Nichol informed law enforcement that she only learned of Shanann's pregnancy on August the 13th, but given her familiarity with the family's life and that other Anadarko co-workers knew about and had congratulated Chris on the pregnancy, that claim of hers may warrant skepticism. A number of YouTube creators and posters on various social media forums have claimed that it has been proven that Chris's sister, Jamie, gave Chris the oxy. They have claimed as fact that if Jamie provided it, she committed a felony and should lose her job and her licence as a home health nurse. If she provided the oxy, it means that she too is a dangerous person who either stole it from work or failed to give the correct dosage to a patient who actually needed it. They go on to claim that she should never have access to patients again. And along with those reported facts, it's been claimed that Jamie Watts also had known substance abuse issues and has been in rehab at some stage along with Nichol Kessinger. Do we have actual definitive proof of any of this? Have we seen physical evidence to support any of this? No. Jamie wasn't a nurse and didn't work in a hospital. She was a respiratory therapist. Aside from stealing a prescription pad and writing up a prescription for herself, how would she have had access? Even using a stolen prescription pad would leave a trail. Why on earth would she risk her career over one 80 milligram oxycodone pill? Even if she did have access at a hospital, it's not like medications are dispensed at the drop of a hat for anyone and everyone. That stuff is tightly controlled. After this theory emerged and began taking the internet by storm, another idea popped up and began circulating again as hard fact. Ronnie Watts had had some previous issues with cocaine use when Chris left the family home to go to university. Therefore, Ronnie Watts also abused oxycodone and he was the one who gave it to Chris. This rumour seemed to be fuelled by the fact that Chris stated that he would never say who gave him the oxy, and that there were things that he would take to his grave, the oxy being one of them. People suggested that Chris would have thrown Nichol Kessinger under the bus by that stage, and because he hadn't, it meant that she genuinely hadn't given him the drug. Speculation raged that Chris would only protect his family, especially his father, who he said was his hero. There is no evidence anywhere to support the idea that Ronnie ever took oxycodone or had any substance issues at the time of the murders. When this theory began dying down, the world shifted the blame to Chris's mum, Cindy. It was obvious that Cindy was the most likely implicated in supplying Chris with the oxy because of her dislike of Shanann. This idea really took hold in online forums, with many discussing how strange Chris's relationship had been with his mother and how his childhood had been bizarre, despite no actual evidence of these facts. The most sensible claim seems to be that the oxycodone tablet had been prescribed to Shanann when she had a neck surgery. We see from the officer's body-worn footage that there was a stash of medication in the basement, and it wouldn't be outrageous that, had Shanann been prescribed opiates after a surgery, she had some left over and would keep them just in case. We don't know that Shanann was prescribed these kinds of painkillers for her neck surgery because we've never been privy to medical information, which has all been sealed and unfortunately doesn't help in this situation in actually getting us answers and the truth. But the biggest issue with this element of Chris's confession is that nobody can prove that Shanann was ever given oxy. The problem with the many theories surrounding the oxycodone, like almost every other theory in this case, is that there's absolutely no evidence of anything other than what Chris Watts has said himself, and his story never remains the same. A biggie in these letters is Chris says that the reason the medical examiners found oxycodone in Shanann's system during autopsy is because he gave it to her. What autopsy report has he been privy to? Because that's not what we see in the report. Again, that's something to cover in another video, but it's another reason that speculation rages. Chris must have been made aware of the real autopsy results, and the ones we've seen have been massively redacted. This particular allegation has fueled theories suggesting a longer-term plan and premeditation, and raised serious ethical and legal questions. But again, we have only Chris's word on this, and he's already proven himself to be an unreliable narrator. Why would he lie about doing something so awful? People make false statements in their confessions all the time, and it's not always clear why. Henry Lee Lucas, for example, had himself taking responsibility for murders as far as Japan, when this was clearly not possible, and law enforcement knew that. Lucas appeared to enjoy the attention when spinning some of his lies, and also benefited from additional perks from the police, like outings to crime scenes, fizzy drinks, cigarettes, fast food. What would Chris's motivation have been to lie about doing something awful if he hadn't done it? What purpose would it serve him? He never wanted to be portrayed as a monster, and it mattered to him what others thought of him. This came across in both messages to friends when Shanann initially went missing and during his police interviews. So, did Chris give Shanann oxycodone or not? There's no physical evidence of it ever happening. What do you guys think? Comments below. Please have this discussion amongst yourselves. I will hop into any comments that I see. I'd love to talk to you all about this. As I said earlier, remember, please keep things respectful. We're all humans. We all have different opinions, but I won't tolerate any hate in the comments section. I mean, I think what we can say in all of this is that Chris's letters from prison read like the script of a bad psychological thriller. Twisted logic, wild contradictions, and motives that shift with every paragraph. At times, it sounds like he's trying to unburden his soul, and at others, it reads like the man's just out to lunch. But beneath all the rambling, there's a darker thread. One that seems to point toward revenge. Specifically, revenge on Nichol Kessinger, the woman he had the affair with, and who later vanished from public view. Let's just say this now. Chris's letters sound nothing like someone at peace. Instead, he flips between self-pity and passive aggression. He claims that Nichol isn't to blame for anything, then turns around and says his family was in the way of him being with her. And that's not absolution. That's a justification. He repeatedly calls Nichol the wrong kind of person to get involved with. But what does that mean? That she misled him, gave him hope, pressured him to choose between her and his family? He never says it directly, but the implication lingers. Chris describes the murders not as a spontaneous breakdown, but almost like a twisted solution. He writes that he felt he had to kill his wife and daughters because they were keeping him from Nichol. It's chilling. It's calculated. But then he says he hopes Nichol finds peace. It's like he wants to appear noble while also blaming her for the unthinkable. People, myself included, have speculated that Nichol gave him an ultimatum. Them or me. But here's the thing. In these letters, Watts doesn't present it as a decision that's been forced on him. He presents it like revenge. Like if he couldn't have the life she promised, then no one else would either. Could Chris have been seeking revenge on Nichol? Could he have snapped because she abandoned him after the murders, cut off all contact, changed her name, disappeared? We know that Chris's attorneys had attempted to make contact with her. She'd ignored them for some time and then eventually told them basically to get lost. In that context, his letters do feel more like manipulation. A kind of emotional trap. He publicly absolves her, but in the next breath drops lines that suggest she played a pivotal role in his downfall. It's a psychological catch-22. He says he's not blaming her, but everything else he writes does exactly that. And if she ever reads these letters, how could she possibly find peace knowing that he's still talking about her as the trigger for his crimes? Throughout the letters, Watts talks about a growing anger towards Shanann, but the logic behind that anger is thin, almost non-existent. He doesn't describe any violent fights, no new revelations, no abuse. All he does mention, over and over, is how his relationship with Shanann kept him from Nichol. And here's where it gets manipulative. He never outright blames Shanann, but he paints a picture of being trapped, like he was the victim of a life he didn't want. In his words, Shanann was controlling, argumentative, and made him feel powerless. But all this is incredibly one-sided. As I've said earlier, we are going to do a video on the relationship between Chris and Shanann, which will look a little bit into Shanann's character. There are some things that people believe they may or may not have seen in some of Shanann's Facebook Live videos, but what we are working on at the moment is what we have, which is the evidence that's been presented and the documents that have appeared. At this point, we just have Chris's side. Shanann isn't here to agree or refute anything that he says, so we are literally just working off his letters. So is Chris blaming Shanann? Yes, but passively, subtly. The kind of blame that tries to justify a monstrous act by rewriting history. Now, one of the most unsettling and frankly bizarre parts of the letters is Chris's repeated reference to Shanann relieving herself. He mentions it happening during or after her death. He even claims his daughters asked about the smell in the truck, implying they were smelling what had happened to their mother's body. Let's be clear. This is not only deeply inappropriate to mention the way he does, it's also disturbing in how fixated he seems on it. The fact that he brings it up more than once suggests something more than just a clinical description. It feels like an attempt to dehumanize Shanann, to strip her of her dignity even in death. It raises an important question. Why would he focus on that detail? Is it guilt? Or is it a subtle act of psychological distancing, reducing her to a body, a function, rather than a person whose life he ended? Medically speaking, Yes, when someone is strangled, it is possible for the body to involuntarily release urine or feces. And this usually happens shortly before or after death as the muscle control is lost. So the act itself isn't unusual from a biological standpoint. What is unusual is that Chris zeroes in on this detail and chooses to highlight it in his letters, especially when describing the scene with his daughters in the truck. If his daughters really did ask about a smell, and if it really was the result of Shanann's body, mentioning it adds another layer of horror to an already unfathomable situation. But again, why include this in letters supposedly written for the purpose of confession and reflection? Why not focus on remorse, on empathy? Instead, we get cold, grotesque descriptions that seem more designed to shift emotional responsibility than express regret. Throughout the letters, Chris repeatedly refers to being taken over by a dark spirit the night of the murders. He doesn't say he lost control exactly, but rather that something evil was working through him. I mean, honestly, this reads more like a dodgy horror story than a true crime confession. So, what is going on here? Because this is where the narrative shifts. It's no longer just about an affair or anger or feeling trapped. Now it's supernatural, paranormal, demonic. He implies that what happened was driven by an external force, as if he was just the vessel. I mean, did somebody give this guy the Amityville Horror to read while he was banged up? On the surface, this might sound like guilt manifesting in symbolic language, but dig deeper and it starts to feel like something much more manipulative. Another way to detach from responsibility entirely. One of the strangest details? Chris says that after the murders, while in prison, he was visited by his deceased grandparents. Not lovingly, not comfortingly, but as demonic presences. Angry seeming, condemning, otherworldly. He describes them almost like hallucinations. Dark, looming, with red eyes that accused him of what he'd done. Again, it begs the question, is this a guilty conscience? A descent into psychosis? Or is he crafting a dramatic tale to make his story sound bigger than life? Because here's the thing. Chris doesn't present these visions with fear. He presents them almost theatrically. Like he wants you to see his pain, feel his torment. But at the same time, you're never quite sure how much of it is real. Let's be clear. Talking about being possessed or taken over isn't new for people who commit horrible acts. It's an old psychological and spiritual defense. Blame it on the devil, on fate, on something, anything other than yourself. Is there even such a thing as evil entities and dark forces? Well, that's a whole other topic to explore. But if Chris is claiming demonic influence, what is he really saying? That he wasn't in control? That the murders weren't entirely his fault? Because if so, it's yet another deflection, just like blaming Shanann, just like blaming his emotional state or the stress of the affair. Or maybe he has actually gone mad. That's maybe why he won't subject himself to a psychological evaluation. Isolation, guilt, and the unbearable weight of what he did might have fractured his mind. Prison isn't exactly a place for healing. It's really not. As a former probation officer, I can tell you this as fact. And Chris's letters are full of contradictions, strange tangents, and surreal imagery. So is he lying or breaking down? Either way, the talk of the dark spirits, to me, feels less like insight and more like a smokescreen. But Chris Watts, the man who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 daughters in cold blood, now claims he's found God. In his letters, he talks about reading scripture, repenting for his sins, and experiencing a spiritual awakening behind bars. But what does that really mean? Is it a genuine transformation, or yet another form of manipulation? Now, I'm not a religious person myself, and I don't pretend to understand the depth of belief some people find in faith. But I do respect it, and I think it's worth asking, why do so many killers suddenly find God after they're locked up for life? Since being incarcerated, Chris has reportedly been reading the Bible daily. He's said that the scripture brings him peace and clarity and that he's finally accepted Jesus Christ into his life. His letters to Cheryln are rambles about repenting, about forgiveness, about seeing signs from God. He even claims that God has a plan for him, even now, after what he's done. On the surface, to some, that might sound like remorse. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It also sounds like a convenient narrative. The reality is, prison conversions are incredibly common. A loss of freedom, total isolation, and overwhelming guilt or fear can push people towards religion. It gives them structure. It offers the idea of forgiveness, even for the unforgivable. For some, it's probably real, and for others, it's a survival mechanism. Let's be honest, when you've destroyed everything and there's no way out, clinging to the idea that a higher power still sees value in you can be incredibly appealing. It's a kind of emotional escape hatch, but it also raises the question, does someone like Chris turn to God because he's genuinely seeking redemption, or because it helps him rewrite the story, frame himself as changed, forgiven, and maybe, even if he never says it out loud, worthy of a second chance? I mean, Chris isn't alone in this. Other infamous killers have claimed religious conversions behind bars. Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer who murdered and dismembered 17 men, I think it was baptised in prison and said that he had repented before being killed by another inmate. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer, now calls himself the Son of Hope and runs a prison ministry from inside. Then there's the likes of Carla Faye Tucker, who killed 2 people with a pickaxe, became a born-again Christian and was the first woman executed in Texas in over a century. Many people fought to spare her because of her faith. Some of these cases feel sincere, and others feel like damage control. One of the more puzzling things about Chris's supposed journey to God is that he wanted the public to know about it. He asked Cheryln to share it. He wanted it out there. Why? If faith is personal, why make it part of the story? Is it because he genuinely wants others to find salvation? Or because it helps him soften his public image from murderer to man of God? There's really no way to know for sure, but given everything else we've seen from Chris, his contradictions, his emotional manipulation, his ever-changing motives, it's hard not to wonder if this too is just another act. I don't pretend to know what's in someone's heart. Maybe Chris has found faith. Maybe it brings him peace. But given the sheer horror of what he did, it's hard to see this as anything more than damage control, a spiritual plea bargain. Whether real or not, his public turn to God changes nothing for his victims, and it doesn't erase the manipulation still woven throughout his letters. Of all the writings Chris has produced from prison, some of the strangest and most unsettling, I believe, are the letters he wrote to Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn baby Nico. At first glance, they sound heartfelt, even poetic. But once you sit with them, the tone becomes something else entirely. Theatrical, carefully worded, and strangely disconnected from the horror of what he actually did. One of the first things you notice about the letters is the language. It's soft, it's flowery, it's spiritual. He writes about heaven, about love, about being reunited as a family someday. He says he reads to the girls from his cell. He tells them he misses them and that he's sorry. He asks for forgiveness. It all sounds so emotional until you realise this doesn't sound like Chris. Not the Chris Watts we saw in interviews. Not the Chris Watts we saw in Shanann's Facebook Lives. Not the Chris Watts who sat emotionless as he described loading his daughter's bodies into his truck. The tone feels constructed, like it was written to be read by others, not necessarily to communicate with the people he wrote it to. So we have to ask, who were these letters really for? Shanann and the girls are gone. These aren't private journal entries. They were shared publicly. According to the book, Chris's mother, Cindy, even encouraged him to give them to author Cheryln Cadle, saying they would be useful for the book. Let that sink in. Useful for the book. That's not the language of healing. That's the language of PR, of narrative control. If these letters were intended to express true sorrow, why would their usefulness in a book even come up? It makes it hard not to see them as a performance. One meant to show Chris as the grieving father, the lost soul, the man finally seeking redemption. Look at the substance of those letters. He apologises, yes, but do these letters actually take responsibility? Or are they just emotional smoke? Chris talks about being alone and not knowing how to go on without them. That's not the same as confronting what he did. That's self-pity. Regret that he's suffering, not necessarily that they died. And in parts of the letters, he writes about being with them again one day in heaven, as if the very family he murdered might somehow forgive and welcome him back into their arms. That kind of thinking isn't just delusional, it's downright disturbing. It skips past accountability and imagines a future that allows him to feel comforted rather than condemned. Now, of course, we can't say for certain what's going on in Chris's head. Maybe he really does feel some version of grief. Maybe these letters are the only way that he can cope with what he's done. But it is hard to ignore the fact that these writings feel less like a man unburdening his soul and more like a man trying to rebuild his image. They don't read like a confession. They read like an act, carefully crafted, emotionally distant, even when they appear poetic. And when you remember what he did, to be fair, the idea of him reading bedtime stories to the daughters he smothered and dropped in oil tanks is almost too grotesque to comprehend. Again, let's be brutally honest. Saying you're sorry after murdering your family means very little without taking real responsibility, and Chris still shifts the blame to Shanann, to Nichol Kessinger, to Nutgate, to his mental state, to dark spirits, to anything but himself. Writing that he's lonely doesn't equal accountability. Writing that he wants to be with his family in heaven doesn't erase the fact that he chose to end their lives here on earth, despite him saying that he would have chosen death over ever hurting them. And while the letters sound a bit flowery, maybe even emotional, they read more like a performance than a confession, something he wants the public to see, rather than something he needed to say. Chris really wants to control the narrative. That's what these letters are. A second attempt at rewriting history, this time with himself as both monster and martyr. But the truth bleeds through the pages. The inconsistencies, the creepy justifications, the double-edged sympathy for Nichol, they don't show remorse. They show a man still obsessed with image, control, and the woman who walked away. In the end, the letters don't exonerate anyone. They just make one thing clear. Chris Watts isn't searching for redemption. He's still playing a role. And it's a really bad one. What do you guys think? Was Chris trying to pin the blame on Nichol without saying it outright? Or are his letters just the ramblings of a guilty man lost in his own lies? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to hear from you on this subject. I really do enjoy reading all of your opinions, and I try to reply to as many comments as possible. In the next video, we're going to be looking at Nichol Kessinger and her potential role in these murders. This is where the case starts to turn into a little bit of a circus because there has been so much speculation. So we're going to be looking at the facts that we have. And then we're going to dissect some of the theories that have surrounded Nichol and try and break down where exactly they come from and why they could be damaging to the case. If that sounds like a video that might interest you, please do pop back next week for the next instalment. I aim to upload videos every Monday at 6 p.m. English time. And if I'm ever going to be delayed with my schedule, or if I'm going to post anything of interest in between the main episodes while we're working on this case, I will pop a message in the community tab to keep you all up to speed. Thank you to everybody who has found themselves here today. Thank you to those that are returning. Honestly, your support means the world to me. I can't grow my channel without the help of you lot, and I really do appreciate it. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, I've been Fiona, and this has been Case Continued.